Welcome to the Psychotherapy Central podcast, where we discuss love, attachment, and healing from trauma. A place where you can gain the knowledge, tools, and wisdom to help you build secure, flourishing relationships. I'm your host, clinical psychotherapist and couples therapist, Jennifer Nurick. Hello and welcome. In this episode, we're diving into the often misunderstood world of dissociation. So whether you're a professional in the mental health field or someone who experiences dissociation, I hope this episode will shed light on what dissociation is and why it occurs. So I want to talk about dissociation because as a trauma therapist, it's something I frequently work with and that many of my clients struggle to understand. So let's start with understanding what dissociation actually is. It's a mental process where a person disconnects from their thoughts, feelings, memories, sense of identity. And while that might sound like a conscious choice, it's usually an involuntary escape mechanism. That is, a way for the mind to cope during extremely stressful or traumatic situations. I've heard people describe dissociation as feeling detached from their body, like an old version of themselves, or like the world around them isn't real. Others might experience severe forms like dissociative amnesia, where they can't remember important personal information. So why does it happen? Now, your brain has a remarkable ability to protect you from psychological and sometimes physiological pain. When experiences are too overwhelming to process in the moment, as is the case with intense trauma or acute stress, dissociation helps manage that overload by temporarily disconnecting you from the experience. So, dissociation is a protective mechanism. I'm going to say it again. It's a protective mechanism. For example, during a traumatic event, a person might feel as though they're watching themselves from outside their body. And this can provide a temporary escape from having to be fully engaged with the intense distress that's going on inside and outside at that moment. You might have an experience of kind of floating above your body or watching what's happening from somewhere else. So what triggers dissociation? Is it always related to trauma? It's a good question. Mostly, yes. It's commonly triggered by trauma, but it's not exclusively tied to it. It can also be a response to extreme stress, anxiety, or even certain physical illnesses. I guess in a way that you can say, well, they are traumatic. Stress, anxiety, certain physical illnesses are kind of traumatic. Anything that's kind of overwhelming for the system. However, trauma, especially repeated trauma, like that experienced in childhood abuse, can fundamentally shape the brain's propensity to dissociate as a way of coping. The system learns, that works really well for me. I could manage that intense experience better if I wasn't in my body or connected to my body in my usual way. I'll do that again. And that's not a conscious thought. That's much more of parts of our system just doing what they do as a way to keep us safe. So in a way, it's like the brain's emergency response system to protect us. Now, when our usual coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, the brain switches to a state where it can insulate itself from full consciousness of the trauma. And while that might be incredibly helpful and protective in the moment, if it's used repeatedly, it can lead to a pattern where dissociation becomes a habitual response to stress or even to kind of what might be a minor trigger later on. So to be clear, at the time, it's likely to have been incredibly helpful and adaptive to help you cope with what was going on. But later in your life, it can become an issue if you find yourself dissociating, for example, under work pressure or during a conflict with your partner. So what are some signs that someone might be experiencing dissociation? So common signs include gaps in memory, especially of recent events, feeling disconnected from your body or emotions, a sense of the world being unreal in some way, difficulties focusing. People sometimes describe it as feeling like they're observing their life rather than living their life. These are all red flags that it might be occurring. So for those listening who might be recognizing some of these signs in themselves or others, what would be my recommended first step? So the first step is to seek help from a mental health professional experienced in dealing with trauma and dissociation. Your amazing, amazing psyche dissociates for a reason, and changing old patterns and releasing that trauma takes a lot of love, compassion, time, and care. And it's best to do those processes with somebody who is trained in the field. So that would be my first tip. Also noting that dissociation, stumbling on my words, dissociation is tricky to work with on our own, because when it happens, we disconnect so powerfully. So my first step is reach out to a mental health professional. So thank you for joining us today as we explore the often misunderstood world of dissociation. In this episode, we delved into how it acts as a protective mechanism, allowing you to detach from overwhelming experiences, typically triggered by trauma or extreme stress. We discussed some common signs of dissociation, such as memory gaps, feelings of detachment, and a sense of unreality. So if you recognize these signs in yourself or others, reaching out to a mental health professional skilled in trauma and dissociation is a crucial first step. Remember that understanding dissociation is the first step towards healing and compassion. So join us next time as we continue to uncover more about healing patterns of dissociation. Take care, and thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me on this episode. If you want to learn more about all things love, attachment, and trauma, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at psychotherapy.central or visit my website at psychotherapycentral.health. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review and a 5-star rating. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.